Ah, the perils of serialized storytelling. What happens when a show makes a great episode at the wrong time? This is a review of Rosetta, the 11th episode of Star Trek Discovery's 4th season. If you're watching this before you've seen the episode, don't worry, this review is spoiler-free. This episode took me on a ride. I'm not talking in terms of its plot, though it did that a little bit. I'm talking in terms of my emotional reaction to the episode. It starts out slow with a lot of recapping and table setting and throat clearing, and that was frustrating because, as I mentioned in the previous review, it feels like the show has been spinning its wheels, narratively speaking, for the last couple of episodes, and I just want things to start moving, for Christ's sake! And by the way, when I say that, I'm not talking about the episodes themselves being more action-packed. I've gotten a few comments on my reviews from this season where I've wished things would move a little faster from folks saying, well, I like a quiet episode. I don't want it to be wall-to-wall action. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about narrative progression. The show is telling a serialized story, and the last few episodes feel like they've been moving that story forward by tiny little baby steps. And that's frustrating. So, I felt that way at the start of this episode as well. It took a long time to go a short distance, narratively speaking, and I was starting to lose patience with it in the first act. But then, something wonderful happened. The episode won me over. It turned into, I think, one of the best episodes of the season. Maybe one of the best episodes the show has ever done. Allow me to enumerate why in a spoiler-free way. First, once the A-plot gets going, it gets really good. And in what has become a recurring theme for the times when Discovery is really working this season, it gets good in a way that is reminiscent of classic Trek. Captain Burnham leads an away team down to an apparently abandoned planet, and while down there, the team begins to experience a mysterious phenomenon that seems inexplicable at first, but that could also lead them to what they're looking for. Crew puts their heads together to solve a problem is always a solid basis for a Star Trek story, if you ask me. Another thing I liked about the A-plot of this episode is the production design. The planet the away team visits feels like something out of a 1950s sci-fi magazine cover. There's a point where they enter this cavernous structure, which has outcroppings of rock that curl up out of the ground like tentacles, or maybe they were fossilized tentacles, I don't know. But the look is fantastic. And you've got the crew wearing spacesuits, and they're in the middle of some classic Star Trek shit. I mentioned 1950s sci-fi magazine a moment ago. It feels also like a story out of one of the Gold Key Star Trek comics, which I adore. So very high marks for all of that. The B-plot, which once again centers on Book and Tarka, is excellent as well. After their role in the last episode felt like an afterthought intended to pad out the running time, it's nice to see them back in the thick of it with a story that is engaging and suspenseful. While Captain Burnham and the crew of Discovery have an officially sanctioned mission to carry out, Book and Tarka are still pursuing plans of their own. And in this episode, we see those plans evolve and expand in ways that feel natural and logical, but that also make things more complicated and perilous for everyone involved. And that make me more interested in what's going to happen next. Tarka has a very general goal in mind, but how are they going to actually accomplish it, particularly after the events of this episode? And how will their pursuit of their plans affect what Captain Burnham is trying to do? It's all good stuff, and as I said in the previous review, despite my frustrations with the pace of the storytelling in the season-long arc, which I'll have more to say about in a minute, I'm on the hook. I want to see what happens next. We also get some very well-done character moments in this episode, and not just between major characters, although we do get a few of those too, and they work very well. We get interactions involving important characters who don't always get much screen time, and characters who feel like they should be more important, who also don't get much screen time. And Yes, inevitably, hilariously, we get another character blurting out a snippet of backstory at a crucial moment, but we also get some much better and more naturalistic characterization from them in this episode as well. In fact, that instance of sudden backstory emesis aside, the characterization throughout this episode is really good. After a slow start, this entire episode is really good. It's everything I want from this show, really. And yet, when the episode ended, I returned to that feeling of frustration that I started with. Because for as good as this episode is, and it's really, really good, it still only moves the larger story of this season forward about this much. Just a baby step. We are really late in this season. We only have a couple of episodes left, and at this point, the overarching story feels like it has slowed to a crawl. I'm treading dangerously close to doing what I often say a critic shouldn't do, which is to rewrite the thing they're reviewing, so bear with me here. But I feel like if this episode had been the last one before the mid-season break, or maybe the first one after the break, I'd feel better about where the show is, because we have 2 episodes to go. And thanks to the show running in place for the last few episodes, it feels like we're going to be rushing through a ton of really important stuff in those final episodes. And that has been exactly the problem with Discovery all along. And it was the biggest problem with the first season of Picard as well. Season 2 of Discovery had this problem to the least extent, which might be why it's still my favorite season of the show so far, but every season of the show, along with the first season of Picard, has been plagued by atrocious pacing. It's not always a problem with individual episodes. Sometimes it is, but often it's not. Like this episode, the pacing of the story of this episode is pretty good. Slow start, like I said, but once it gets going, it's paced really well. It cuts back and forth between plots really effectively. It doesn't feel padded. It doesn't feel like it's dragging or rushing. Nothing feels like an afterthought. It's solid. I only wish I could say the same for the story of the season as a whole. Once again, while there have been some very good individual episodes, the season-long story of Discovery has seemingly been backloaded so that very little happens in the few episodes leading up to the finale, and then in the final episode, or perhaps final 2 episodes, we sprint through story beats that are probably going to be very interesting and creative, but that won't land quite as solidly as they should because there won't be room for anything to breathe. I don't know for sure if that's what's going to happen. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm basing that prediction on the fact that it's what has happened to one degree or another in every single prior season of this show and in the first season of Star Trek Picard. That's frustrating. And to be clear, it's frustrating because I like the show. I've noticed that whenever I give one of these episodes kind of a mixed review, I get comments from some of you saying, I'm sorry you don't like the show. And if I've given you that impression, I apologize, because that is not the case. I do like the show. It's far and away my favorite of the current crop of Star Trek shows. I like Star Trek Discovery very much. When it works, it really works. It's great. That's why it's so frustrating that on the season-long scale, at least, the writers keep making the same mistakes year after year after year. Writing well is hard. Writing well for TV is especially hard. Writing well for TV on a show that's telling an ongoing story throughout the season is even more especially hard. And it's the easiest thing in the world for some fan/self-appointed critic, such as myself, to sit here and point out the things I think the obviously very talented and dedicated people who write this show are doing wrong. But it's, and I know I keep using this word, frustrating to see a show I genuinely like continue to get the same things wrong in the same ways after 4 years. Like I said, writing well is hard. Successfully executing a story you've come up with that sounds amazing in your head is really, really hard. But in theory, addressing pacing issues like the ones that have affected the current crop of Trek shows is not that hard. Actually doing it is not easy, but figuring out what to do, that's not nearly as challenging. Whenever I bring up these pacing issues, I invariably get comments from folks who say that the problem is the number of episodes. Older Star Trek shows had longer seasons, 22, 25 episodes, sometimes even more. But that's not the problem. More episodes won't fix it. Neither will fewer episodes, as the first season of Picard demonstrates. The problem isn't the number of episodes. The problem is how those episodes are being used to tell the larger story. If you get an order for 13 episodes, and you sit down with your writing staff and you come up with a story arc for that season, and then when you break that story, you realize you've only got enough for, let's say, 9 episodes, there's a fairly simple solution to that problem. Again, in theory, that doesn't require you to fuck up the pacing of the season in order to fit 13 episodes. You can structure the story in phases. In fact, chances are it probably already falls roughly into something like a 3-act structure. So you build the story to have a resolution at the end of each act. You close a narrative loop to give that part of the story a sense of completion while still leaving enough unresolved so that you can pick it back up and continue the story. But before you do that, instead of immediately moving ahead into the next phase, because you have reached a point of some resolution, some closure, now you can afford to take a breather from the larger story. And in that breather, you can do a standalone episode or two. And those episodes can be slow-paced or fast-paced, quiet and character-driven, or rip-roaring and action-packed, whatever you want, as long as they're mostly self-contained. Develop some of your characters. Tell that perfect 1-episode sci-fi story you've always wanted to tell. And drop in a few lines, maybe a short scene or two referring back to the larger story, so we in the audience know that's still a thing, that there's still unfinished business there, but focus on the standalone story of the episode. Then pick up the larger story and begin the next phase in the episode after that, or 2 episodes after that, or whatever. But by structuring the season to move forward in phases with partial resolutions, followed by a breather, then the next phase, you can solve a lot of the pacing problems that have afflicted these new Star Trek shows from the beginning. Again, and I cannot stress this enough, in theory, I'm not an expert. I'm not a writer on the show. I'm not presuming to know better than the actual writers, and it's entirely possible that they could structure a season in the manner I'm suggesting, and it would not work out for the better. But it would be nice to see them try something different. Anyway, those are my thoughts about this episode, and also a little about this season to date. Let me know what you thought, but remember, my review was spoiler-free. So if you're going to include spoilers in your comments, please include a spoiler warning so that folks who haven't seen the episode yet can avoid spoilers if they want. If you want to support my channel, go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron, or click the join button to become a member. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week for a review of episode 12.